It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
One of the most interesting debates in modern times has come about in the last 40 years surrounding the question of whether or not man has landed on the moon. Landing on the moon consistently ranks in the top 20 technological achievements in all of history, but conspiracy theorists have questioned everything from photos and videos taken on the moon to the reality of technology available at that time. Was the moon landing really a success for the United States, or was it a cover-up to hide the fact that the U.S. was losing to the Soviet Union in the ultimate struggle for power over space? Many believe the space race, as it would later be called, officially began on October 4th, 1957, with the launch of the first satellite Sputnik by the Soviet Union. However, it had actually started at the end of World War II, when the Soviet Union and the United States both got a hold of German rocket technology and rocket scientists. Both nations saw this technology as important to their security and felt whoever had control of it would become the stronger world power. Though the United States and the Soviet Union had been allies during World War II, the years that followed were full of mistrust for each other that led to military and political tension, the nuclear arms race, and economic and technological competitions. This time was known as the Cold War. When the Soviet Union beat the United States in putting a satellite in orbit, it pushed the United States to move harder and faster to beat the Soviets in putting a human in space. Both countries were frantically working to create newer and better technology. But in 1961, the Soviets again beat the U.S. by launching a man into orbit around the Earth. A Russian named Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space on April 12, 1961. 3 weeks later, on May 5th, Alan Shepard became the first American in space. He didn't orbit, but he was the first human to control his own spacecraft. A week after the Soviets launched Gagarin into space, President John F. Kennedy asked Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson to have NASA start looking for ways the U.S. could catch up in the space race. On May 25, 1961, Kennedy announced to Congress,
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Just 9 months later, on February 20th, 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth, not once, but 3 times. Over the course of the next 7 years, NASA put its best engineers to work and stepped up to Kennedy's challenge. On July 20th, 1969, the United States met the goal of putting the first man on the moon. But did it really happen? Many theories have surfaced over the years claiming the moon landing was staged in an attempt to make sure the world believed the U.S. had won the space race. According to them, NASA did not have the technical ability to go to the moon, but pressure due to the Cold War with the Soviet Union forced them to fake it. Most of the debate comes from perceived problems in the pictures and videos taken on the moon during the Apollo 11 mission. One of the most common claims involves the American flag that was placed on the moon. In this picture, the flag appears to be blowing, yet the flag could not possibly do this because there is no wind or atmosphere on the moon. The appearance of the flag's movement can be explained because the flag has wire mesh sewn through it and a horizontal bar to hold it out. As the flag was being placed, it had to be rocked back and forth to get it to hold in the hard, solid ground. This back and forth motion made it appear to be waving. At their technical debriefing and press conference after their mission, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin shared that the rod holding the flag out was not all the way extended, and this also gave the flag a rippled look. Another claim involves the stars missing from the background in Apollo 11 pictures. Shouldn't stars be seen clearly in all of the photos because of the lack of atmosphere on the moon? The fact is, it's difficult to capture something very bright and something else very dim on the same piece of film. The pictures needed to highlight the work of the astronauts, so they needed to be as brightly exposed as possible. The pictures were taken using very fast exposure settings, which limits the amount of light coming in. Also, if a false background of stars had been used to stage the landing, astronomers would have been able to see any mistaken star patterns and know the mission was faked. This next claim focuses on the famous photo of Neil Armstrong's footprint on the moon. It's strange that a man can create such a perfect footprint on the surface of the moon, yet the lunar module weighing nearly 4 tons makes almost no mark. The dirt on the moon is very fine like baby powder and is only a couple of inches deep. Directly underneath is solid rock, making it impossible for the lunar module to sink down any further below the surface. Making a footprint that looks perfect and stays that way would be easy with such fine dirt, and with no atmosphere it would not get blown away. In this next claim, the picture shows Buzz Aldrin coming out of the lunar module. It shows him in the shadows of the lander, yet his suit is plainly visible. There are other photos with problems in the shadows. Some shadows don't appear to be parallel with each other or the right lengths, and some shadows seem well lit from the wrong angle. Photos like these have led people to believe light was coming from somewhere else, like movie studio lights. NASA officials say there were in fact other light sources. There was light from the sun, the Earth's reflected light, light reflecting off the lunar module, and reflections from the moon's surface. It is also important to point out that the surface of the moon is not flat, and if an object is in a bit of a hole, it will have a different shadow than an object next to it on a flat surface. Another popular controversy of the Apollo 11 moon landing deals with the lunar module itself. In this picture, the lunar lander appears to rest gently on the moon's surface. The ground beneath the module looks like it hasn't moved at all. Many think when the lunar module landed, there should have been a large dust cloud that would have moved all the dirt, and rocket output should have formed a crater underneath it. Space-to-ground audio tapes from the Apollo 11 mission reveal that the lunar module's engines were pulled back just before landing, and it didn't hover above the ground long enough to stir up much dust. On the moon, where there is no atmosphere, there would not be a fire coming from the engines to create much of a hole or a crater. At the time of Apollo 11 in 1969, the Soviet Union had put men in space 5 times more than the United States, and had beaten them on every major space achievement, like the first satellite and the first human to orbit the Earth, but they had still not put a man on the moon. Press officials for the Russian space program were telling the world they would not visit the moon because they believed it was too dangerous. They were concerned about an area of high radiation that has to be passed through to get to the moon, called the Van Allen belt. The spacecraft used at that time would not have had enough protection from the amount of radiation the astronauts would have had to travel through. But if this was true, then why have none of the astronauts who have traveled to the moon ever had cancer or died from being exposed to radiation? The only astronauts in history to have ever passed through the Van Allen belts were the 12 men in the Apollo program. This argument made even more people wonder about the moon landing than ever before, because certainly if the Russians, who had done everything else possible to win the space race, were afraid, then it must be true. This claim was finally put to rest in 1989, nearly 20 years after the moon landing, when Sergei Khrushchev, the son of the late Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, said in an interview that the Van Allen belts were used to cover the fact that the Soviet Union had been trying very hard to put a man on the moon, and failed. The Apollo 11 moon landing controversy is one of those debates that seems to stand the test of time. No matter how many times each claim is shown to be false, there always seems to be another one pop up. Overall, science has prevailed and continues to prove time and time again that there were indeed men on the moon. In the 1960s, the space race led to amazing leaps in technology through the competition between the United States and Russia. The world event of landing on the moon also changed diplomacy, or the relationship between the two countries. The competition for control over space grew out of the Cold War between the two nations. However, 40 years later, it is interesting to see the changes that have taken place that have led to a friendship between the US and Russia, which make our world a better place today.